Hi, welcome to mediatorpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about mediation, negotiation, and collaboration. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a valuation expert and divorce mediator in St. Louis, Missouri. I specialize in divorce and partner disputes, but today we're going to speak with Amy Adler. She's a CPA, a certified fraud examiner, a CDFA, which you're going to want to know about, and she helps people create post-divorce budgets in order to have a secure financial future. And I'm going to let her tell you more about that, but she's based in Austin, Texas, and brings a very unique blend of financial expertise, a little fraud investigation, a little corporate accounting, a little public accounting, and her own blend of personal experience to divorce. So welcome, Amy. How are you?
Thanks. Good to be here, Melissa. Thanks.
Now, you have an amazing background with a lot of credentials, and I think they're very important in the divorce world. But we're talking about something that I think happens more often in divorce, which is we have people that have a complex situation and they come in and maybe they have a business or maybe they have things and they don't know exactly where everything is, or they don't know how they're living. Maybe one person has more financial control and things like that. So they come into this divorce process and the attorney's like, oh my gosh, we got all these legal issues. And the expert's like, we got all these financial issues. And the person is really sitting there saying, okay, but can I afford to live in this house? What's my budget? Like, what should I focus on? And there's more of a primal kind of urgency to understand the financial picture. So when we started talking, you started talking to me about like a post-divorce budget. And I was like, okay. But like post-divorce, like it's too late. But you were talking a little bit like different. So can you tell us like when you think of this concept, what are you thinking of? Because it is very unique.
Well, thank you for saying that. Really, it makes perfect sense that before you go into your divorce negotiations, you need to know what you need and what you have to be able to figure out from a liquidity standpoint, are you going to be able to make it on a month-to-month basis with the income that you have? Or do you need money from your marital estate to help you get on your feet? So what I call a post-divorce budget for my clients is usually just 1 to 2 years post-divorce. We do like a monthly basis, and then we also annualize so that we can kind of see how things are going to look over the entire year. But I don't recommend doing more than 1 to 2 years post-divorce because almost every single person's life changes drastically in the first couple of years after their divorce. And it's really, really hard to predict and anticipate what those income and expenses are going to look like. So I encourage people not to worry about things that far ahead. Just know that things will always work out for us if we just have faith and we do the right things in those first couple of years. So the budget is really intended to look at your expenses and your income for 1 to 2 years post-divorce. And that's what I call a post-divorce budget. That is not budgeting after your divorce is final. It is beforehand, before you've negotiated your settlement. So it is a little bit of a misleading term.
Yeah, and it's interesting, but I think that it makes sense because you want to see post-divorce, after you get divorced, what are you going to be kind of future expenses? And that has to take into account some things might change in the future, right? And realistically, I think budgets are easy to understand, right? Conceptually, most people don't do them. Most people have no way of even starting to put one together, right? So it's like we understand the concept of like balancing our checkbook, but we don't really understand it. It becomes kind of important in this process because you're going to be making big financial decisions. And in some cases, you might even not even have told your spouse that you're going to be doing this. And so, as we talk about kind of why it's important to create this post-divorce budget, can we also talk about some of the documents that they could just start to gather to get ready for creating this this budget as well? Because it's, like it could take some time to collect some of this information, right?
It can. I mean, there's a couple of different ways people can go about this post-divorce budgeting process. One is to say, I'm going to put these numbers on this piece of paper and I'm going to commit to living by them, regardless of what I've done in the past. And so in that case, there may be less of the historical information that you need to gather, although I would argue that it's still helpful to see what you did in the past to be able to make sure you're being reasonable with what you're preparing for the future. And of course, the other methodology is to look at your historical spending and think about the things in your life, maybe even your daily life, that are going to change, to try to anticipate what the cost differential or the income differential will be in that new life. For example, if you were on your soon-to-be ex-spouse's health insurance plan, but you are self-employed or not employed, and you're going to need to get new health insurance, or maybe no health insurance for some people. That's an important thing to be thinking about in the budgeting process, because that's a huge expense for many people if they have to go get a plan off the marketplace, or if they have to be creative with getting some type of catastrophic plan and integrative medicine, like monthly subscription service, all those different potential things. But you need to do that legwork to figure out how much that's going to cost in order to build your budget. So in terms of documents, if you're going to use that historical information or if you're going to do I'm going to draw the line in the sand and commit myself to live in this way, it can be helpful to communicate with some other professionals in the industries that sell the types of services and costs that you're going to be needing, like a health insurance broker, for that example. If you want to talk with a mortgage lender, I always encourage people to talk with their current lender and or a broker who I refer all my clients to find out what kind of mortgage can I qualify for? How much is that going to cost on a monthly basis using the current interest rates, which are outrageous right now? I mean, this is a common issue for all of my clients, is that they bought their house or refinanced their house at 2% interest rate, but if they refinance after the divorce, it's 7%. Well, that's a huge difference in your monthly expense there for your mortgage payment that we need to be able to plan for if that's where you want to go. So this budgeting process is super helpful, in answering the why question as well, super helpful for helping people who are going through the process design their life after their divorce too. Where are they going to live? How are they going to make ends meet? What kind of job are they going to have? Are they going to stay self-employed, or are they going to have to get a W-2 income in order to, or a side hustle? How are all of these things going to happen? Are they going to travel more? Are they going back to school? So I also like in this process to talk with folks about dreaming their future life. This is an opportunity to hit that reset button on your life and figure out, what do you want to do with your life next? You're not going to be answering to a spouse anymore unless you're getting married to someone else right away, which we don't recommend. So what do you want to do? You want to take up new hobbies? You want to go back to old things that you enjoyed that never had the time to do? Or do you want to, travel the world, start a business, go back to school? The choices are endless if you do this planning in advance before you start negotiating, so that you can figure out how to make the financial piece of the puzzle that is your life work out well. So some other types of documents you were asking about. If you are going to go look at historical data, running your credit card statements for 6 to 12 months, your bank statements for 6 to 12 months, and looking at what you've spent previously, especially if you and your spouse have had different accounts, have had separate credit cards and separate bank accounts. It's a lot easier to figure out, well, what was I doing? But if it's joint, then maybe you have to do a little bit more legwork there to figure out what's mine versus what's theirs. And am I still going to be doing things this way? Do we still have this cost?
Which is why I think this is so, I think it's really interesting, because I get more clients that are very confused with finances and they think they're stupid. And I am literally having an epiphany right now. And I do this finance all the time, but you are so right in that we're really spending for the litigation, right? When we're in the litigation, we're spending a lot of time trying to look at the past spending, the past historical whatever, right? And it's really misaligned with what, if you're looking at what your budget is, you are dead right. Like, it may not be important what the past was. You kind of have to decide, okay, and the two big things that you hit on, really, really key. The first two things that people say, okay, where am I going to live and how am I going to pay, and what health insurance am I going to have? Right? Because if it's tied, like they both were business owners, it could have been tied to the business. The house is always kind of stay split, things like that. So it makes perfect sense that you would start kind of fresh and say, okay, let's assume that you get to a different space. Like, what would be your budget for a mortgage? Is that so you kind of do it a little bit more, build it up what the life is that you're going to want to live as an option.
Yes.
Is it always assuming that the house would not be a part of it, or like, how do you start to go through some of those elements?
So if they really want the house and they know that it's a contentious thing that both spouses want the house, I will usually recommend, let's do two budgets. Let's do one that looks like what happens if you keep the house, one, what things look like if you move. And so that's when I start reaching out to my real estate agent buddies in the different locations where my clients are, to help the clients find what are the possible home options in the area that they want to be in right now. If they were to go buy right now, what would that cost price wise? And then we go to the mortgage person. What would the mortgage payment look like for that? And can they qualify? So then they have.
I'll interject, and I rarely interject, but I will say we have had so many calls, and I know you and I get a lot of the same situation of people with the 2% mortgages that are like, we want to keep the mortgage, but we want to separate. And for the most part, that's just not an option. And so you really do have to seek some, like a certified divorce lending specialist, or, like, you really got to go look to see if that's even, because if there is a possibility, it's a very remote possibility. And you got to consider that you're going to have to refinance at the current housing prices, current rates, right? Like, what's really happening. You're forcing them to take a very realistic view, not like.
Yes.
Okay.
And using that in the negotiation process too, right? Because if the other spouse gets to keep the house, well, maybe they're going to compensate for the lower property tax basis and the, interest rate difference by giving more assets from the marital estate to pay the spouse who has to move. So it's really helpful to have in mind already what you're looking at doing going forward, so you can go into mediation or negotiations, whatever methodology you use, saying, this is what I can do, and in order to do that, I need this from you to make up for not having access to this from the house that you're in right now. And I do always encourage my clients to call their bank, their mortgage lender, to see if there is even an option to assume the mortgage, so that they can at least have that question answered when they have the 2% rates that they don't want to let go of. And if they can assume it, what kind of income do they have to show to qualify? So at least we have that answer too.
And I think that's some of, that's some of the legwork. I think when we're counseling clients to how do you save, like, really, how do you save some money in this divorce process, is you start to do some of this legwork and you start to do your budget before everything starts to escalate. And you do know, it might take you a week to call the mortgage company, to get somebody on the phone, to get to the right department. And if you want, you can always pay somebody else to do the legwork, but understand that, it does take time and effort for somebody to do that. And that's why, getting financial professionals involved is important. But I don't think financial professionals is just enough. You can't just be like, oh, my CPA, or oh, my financial advisor, or oh, my current banker, or even my current mortgage person understands this, because in the divorce world, there's a different game being played. and you have to know budgeting in this process. Like even the fact that you're like, yeah, you need to focus on what your budget is going to be. And then is there any houses in that area with the school district that,
Right.
that works for, you know, or calling about your insurance, right? Like that's really, you don't know what you don't know. And maybe you guys have like more tips and tricks and ways to get information or help them, you know, go about the process. Cause like, yeah, you got to talk to brokers about all of this to get an idea.
Yeah, I have resources in most major cities in the country with professionals who can help my clients to be able to answer those questions for them. And what I love about them is that they have the heart for this. They feel compelled to help because they don't make any money from just answering these questions and helping people plan ahead. They don't make money until they actually make the sale, which oftentimes for our clients doesn't happen until many months, if not years, sometimes down the road. But it's super helpful, and they like doing that for people because they know that it helps everyone feel less anxious and more secure. Plus, the added benefit to doing all of this in advance of negotiations is that you know what your bottom line is, what you have to walk out of mediation with, or you have to leave mediation, you know, negotiations if you can't get to that number because you can't make it work. Or, you know, obviously if there's legal reasons why that's what you're going to have to accept, then you got to go back to the drawing board with your budget. And that may be the case too. So financial people can also help with some of that tough love that may be necessary to help people come back down to reality, that going from a dual income household or even just a 2-adult household to single adult household is going to be tighter than, and a lot more work than it was when there were two. So it's a hard lesson, and sometimes people have big chips on their shoulders about having to do it, but it makes life so much more peaceful when our clients can accept that and can financially plan for it ahead of time.
Well, and unfortunately, you know, the divorce process takes a bit of time. You know, even if you're going through it speedily, it could still be 3 to 6 months, just filing things very, you know, like with no problems. During that time period, or even when you're thinking about it, most people think about getting divorced for years before they actually decide to even tell the spouse or make a decision. In that time period, you get to start to heal yourself a little bit, and you get to start to decide the areas that you're going to cut back. You know, like this isn't traditional budgeting in like, okay, you're not going to have your Starbucks anymore. No, like if there are things that make you, you know, happy and fulfilled, then it's making space for those and then coming back off of the keeping up with the Joneses. You know, like let's keep the house because I want everybody to think that nothing's happened and we're still the perfect family that we were before. Like that's a lot of what is the hard conversation. Like, how am I going to tell my kids that we can't afford to do this? Like maybe I'm just a tough love mom because I'm like, hey, no, you're not going to have it. It's too much. That's ridiculous. You know, but those are the hard conversations that I think that they're also kind of coming to you and having these discussions, right? It's not just, you know, some of them might come out. Some people come out with some money to maybe start a business, to start a nonprofit, to do different types of things. And so what are some of the other things besides just budgeting? Because budgeting gets them into the reality, right? We're not saying these have to be low budgets. We're just saying you now are in control of your future and you have to know how you're going to survive, right? So what else can they do to kind of secure a financial future or look at like long-term money goals?
So in the budgeting process, of course, we're talking about the long-term financial goals, whether it's kids' college, retirement, weddings, cars, whatever. And so, you know, that they kind of go hand in hand in planning for them. But the things that people can do are to make sure that they're getting a reasonable settlement out of their marital estate, since more than likely most of our clients at least have something that they've put away, whether it's house equity or retirement plans or something that they can leverage at least to get a portion of in the divorce process, we hope. And if not, of course, they still have an opportunity to build their own financial future by meeting with financial advisors and planners who can help them even fine tune their budgets even more, to put some money away every month to be able to save, and to put them in investment instruments that are going to grow at whatever level of risk tolerance they have. So I don't actually do that as a CPA and a fraud examiner and forensic accountant. My work is all just with them during the divorce process, unless they want help learning how to file their own taxes after divorce. That's the one thing that I'll do with them afterwards. So I hand them off to a financial advisor and or financial planner to help them take the money that they've been awarded in their divorce process and figure out how to prepare for the long-term future that they're wanting financially. So I think that it's really valuable to have somebody in that profession in their corner. I don't like the stock market personally. I am very risk averse. So if I were in charge of my own investing, I would probably not have very much other than my equity in my house, which, stroke of luck. So I encourage people to let the professionals who are experts in their fields do their job and stay in our own lanes, which means, don't try to be your own day trader, your own trader, if that's not your line of work. Hire somebody and you'll be happy that you did, because they will be responsible for helping you get where you want to go.
Well, and I'll give a little bit of an example, because I think that when we get into even considering divorce or in the divorce process, we kind of are told to, talk to an attorney, get an expert, and then you're off to the races. And I think that this is one of the missing pieces, is really understanding, like, how am I going to actually live? Like, a lot of times we're trying to get you assets or big pieces of chunks of something, right? A piece of the house, a piece of this, a piece of money. And then it's like,
what does that mean?
What do I do now?
Right.
And we're not always concerned about, you'll be fine. You'll figure it out. You'll talk to somebody. And I think that it's important to know that all of those people are still important. Like, your financial advisor is still important in your CPA, but you might be misaligning them with, like, they're limited to their understanding of how it applies into divorce, and having the conversation that things are going to be different. Because just like I started into this conversation, I was like, okay, so let's look at the past, and that's how much your budget's going to be going forward. And that's a traditional financial view of it. And that's not how you do it. And you do have some credentials. I used to have the CDFA as well. I think I'm just letting all of them go. I don't know. But how do you, as a CPA and a CDFA, assist your clients through the entire divorce journey? Because tell them a little bit more about the CDFA and how it's not only a decent credential if you want to go into understanding how the finance and accounting world merge with divorce, but maybe you can also tell them, like, how you're training people to also do this kind of process, and learn, because it's a very needed process, and it's unique. It's not just CPA, it's not just CDFA. You're kind of creating a unique process, and maybe you could tell us more about it.
Sure. So you kind of alluded to it, but my services are very customized to whatever the client needs. So pretty much anything in the financial space as it relates to divorce specific issues is in my purview. The only thing that I don't do and I refer out is business valuations. So, and I have a right-hand man, I call him my work husband. It's funny because we are always working together, because we have so many cases that have the same needs. So that's the one thing I don't do, but everything else is on the table. So the budgeting is one thing that I recommend for everyone. And I let them do it to whatever degree they want to do it on their own, and whatever amount of hand-holding they want. So, like we talked about, is this going to be something you want to look at historical data for? Do you want to figure out what your new life is going to look like and commit to a different kind of budget that looks different from what you might have been doing before, spending and bringing in. And then, I have an Excel template that I use because I like to simplify the process as much as possible for people, knowing that divorce is just an overwhelming emotional experience for people. I try not to add stress and activity to their plate as much as I can without compromising the value and the necessity of the things they need to do ahead of time. So my Excel template is just very simplified, and it's, on a monthly basis, an annualized basis. And then they can go fill it out and send it back to me for feedback. And I'll talk to them about, well, have you thought about what this might do for you if you considered this type of health insurance program? If you decided to go with a non-traditional plan, since your health costs are normally like this, could you consider doing this instead? Or your kids are healthy, maybe they could be on this plan, all kinds of options after I've seen it, and I'll challenge them. So that's one big part of the process with me. And then the other is more of like the CDFA role, which is CDFAs are actually designed, the CDFA license certificate is really designed for financial planners and advisors, because they're the ones that have access to the accounts and statements for their clients' accounts. And so they naturally become an easy resource to be able to build the marital estate in a spreadsheet form and be able to give it to clients or even advise clients about how they should negotiate their division. What I will say, though, is a challenge that I've seen in the industry and with that particular designation is that attorneys oftentimes feel that CDFAs are not neutral and are not necessarily reasonable with their clients, because they want their clients to get as much money as they possibly can in hopes that their client will ask them to be their financial advisor afterwards. That's not allowed without some major finagling that has to happen, because the CDFAs can't actually take on clients afterwards without a lot of things happening. But that's the impression that attorneys get. And so the key is doing this work, for me anyway, in a neutral position, where if I'm representing both spouses, which I do, and that's one of the main services that I offer, I use the word mediator very loosely, because although I do have mediator training, I don't actually consider myself a mediator because I'm disqualified, because I make recommendations to both clients about the best way to move forward successfully. I do the budgeting with both of them. I build their marital estate. I help them in a Zoom meeting, all of us together, to negotiate their division in a way that sets them and their children and their families up for success for the future, without attorneys until the very end when it comes time to write up the legal documents and get them filed. So that's a big service. And then when I'm also doing this for just one client, then I am more of an advocate. Oftentimes it's the spouse who doesn't know as much about the finances in the family and needs education. And oftentimes it's also a spouse who does have a lot of financial knowledge, but just isn't good with taxes and wants to understand what are the tax consequences of these decisions, because divorce is so different. Even CPAs will refer their clients to me and say, my client has asked me this stuff and I don't have any idea. Can you help them? Because you're specializing in divorce. And there are some unique things that can be done from a tax perspective as a result of divorce negotiations that a lot of times CPAs don't even realize are options. So I do offer those services. And then the training, I'm always big on education, because I do think knowledge is power. As cliche as that phrase is, it's very true. So I want people to be able to move forward in life knowing what their decisions mean for them financially. So I always educate my clients who are going through divorce, but even bigger right now, I'm working on training a lot of the professionals in the industries who work with clients who are going to be going through these life transition activities. It's not just divorce, but divorce is probably the biggest one where there's issues that need to be understood and resolved. but also before they get married and in death, when their parents may be passing away and they're inheriting assets. All of those things create very similar challenges in the financial space. And I want those professionals like real estate agents, financial planners and advisors, insurance agents to be able to understand what's happening from a bigger picture perspective with their clients so that they can better advise them how to move forward in their own particular area of expertise. So that, like, for example, with real estate agents is the first group that I'm starting to train the most right now. And I'm spending a lot of time with them, helping them understand how real estate fits into the full divorce financial picture, and also explaining to them about the concept of community and separate property, since there are 9 states in the country and 1 optional that have community property rules. I want them to be able, and mortgage lenders too, to be able to explain to their clients, like, hey, if the down payment is coming from your inheritance money, did you know that that means something different for your ownership than if your down payment comes from your brokerage account that you've been saving together as married? Because then it opens the door for the conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's a necessary one. Yep. And at least everyone involved knows what their decisions mean for their financial future in the long term. They might still make the same decisions, but I can tell you that a lot of my clients who I do the forensic work for and am tracing separate property for tell me, good grief, if I had known this rule before I got married, I would have invested very differently.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think people have a clue of how to protect their money in a divorce or getting married. But one of the things that you said, I think is very interesting, and it's about mediation. Mediation right now is like the Wild West. And mediation in divorce, I would say, is happening in litigation, in the courtroom, in the halls, in settlement conferences. So mediation as a concept, or really negotiation as a concept. And so it really becomes, how smart are you financially at the stages of the divorce, right? And so the more that you can arm yourself with knowledge at the beginning, you can make quicker decisions during the process. But let's be real, in divorce currently, we are always trying to get settlements and always trying to get things done. And how you negotiate is having pieces of paper that say what you have, what you owe, how much money do you make, what are your expenses. So like, these are documents, the budget that you're going to use in the process in order to, and if you're the one doing it, you might bring it to a mediate. Like, you could loosely call everything mediation, right? Because we're just trying to work together to find solutions where the normal solution is not going to fit that couple, right? And they could be easy as, like, nesting concepts where kids stay in the house and the parents come in for 1 week and then the other parent comes. Is that uncomfortable? Hell yeah. Is it worse to put your children uncomfortable for your decisions, or you uncomfortable for your decisions? Again, just choices, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what, when you are talking to a professional that has a financial and a divorce background, you're going to have those conversations, as opposed to in the real world, they're going to be like, well, that's not fair. You should stay in that house. That's your house. The conversation is, can you afford that house? Oh, you don't know. Okay, well, let's look. Okay, we can't. Okay, do we have other options? And you're going to have somebody kind of walking you through the process, that it is not as emotional, or like, oh my gosh, everything is like, those things are going to change. But you have these conversations and you slowly make some decisions that you're comfortable with changing, or some of it does become uncomfortable going from 2 households to 1. And so if they're in that kind of situation, and I don't know at what stage people typically come to you at, but maybe you could tell them a little bit more about when they're considering things or how to reach out to you. And we'll kind of scroll some of, a little bit more about Amy and what's Amy's why for doing this?
Oh gosh. Well, so I have been divorced twice. And after my second divorce went all the way to trial, the marriage was only 2 years. And when I realized that my ex was not going to accept reality, and then we had to go to trial, I realized just how complicated the financials in this process are, and that people who don't have the expertise that I have, I mean, I had a 20-year career in audit, fraud investigation, and corporate accounting. So it was easy for me to put all the numbers together, but for other people to have to do this, and my attorneys were very impressed by all the spreadsheets and things I had prepared and gave them. So it just made me realize that there needs to be more support for people going through this process to help them make good decisions. It's also very hard to make decisions unemotionally when you're in a very emotional state. And so I see a lot of people who make irrational, bad financial decisions for themselves purely out of the desire to stick it to their ex, and they end up cutting off their own nose to spite their faces. So that is what made me realize that this work would be really, really valuable. Plus, I've always known that I have a need to be of service to other people. And my career in audit and corporate accounting was slowly sucking the soul out of me. So when I had this revelation, this was the perfect marriage of my professional and personal experience and my desire to really help people. So it's been unbelievably rewarding. I love it so much.
Well, and it is, I would say, the divorce arena and financially is rough. And, like in any given week, it's like we're going to battle. And so I think you have to have kind of a thick skin, and you have to have some passion around it, because, the divorce community wasn't built for people to go through it. It was built for them to have difficulty going through it, to be a process. And the financials, though, were never really thought about. And so I think there's sort of an afterthought. We do a lot of things as afterthoughts financially, and even some of the rules and laws in states are kind of not necessarily thought out very financially well, or use the right terms, or have consistent terms, or, and so I also would encourage people to, understand what's happening in your state, and, reach out to people that you think are going to be of benefit. They're, like you and I can't help everyone, but I think that we're trying to fight the good fight, and we're trying to train people to also do some of this work. And I would really encourage other CPAs and financial advisors and professionals to reach out to you, because I think that you're creating a training that would really be helpful. And it's just the nuances. Like, and once you know those nuances, you're like, oh, but they make a big, it's sometimes catastrophic to not understand what is happening in the divorce arena. So, like, we might be a little dramatic, but, I think we've seen the good and bad side of the divorce world, and we're just trying to help people maybe pave a little bit clearer way for them. So I appreciate all of your time, Amy. If you have anything else that you want to add, or anything that you think you'd want to revisit, we can certainly provide that. And then we'll come back on for some more topics if they have, we should maybe like run through an example of how to get budgeting, because maybe visually people would start to understand it's not that complicated. It's really talking through some of those big issues.
I'm actually almost done with developing an online budgeting course for post-divorce that will be made available to anybody online pretty soon. So I think that'll be a great resource for people who want to DIY, or if they want to work with professionals. it's really just educational and walks them through the template that I have and brings up a lot of the same questions that you and I talked about today, and some additional things too to think about that may be impacting your life post-divorce. I think it is going to be a really useful tool, and try to simplify a process that could be really overwhelming to people who are not used to doing that kind of stuff. The only other thing I wanted to bring up is just, you kind of alluded to it earlier too, is that if people are thinking about getting divorced and, going through that and, their own healing process and are realizing that this is the direction they need to go, it is incredibly invaluable to reach out to a professional like us to start planning that budgetary stuff. And in fact, I have actually had experiences where some people have hired me to help them, and they stayed married because they realized that when they took the money issue off the table and felt like they had control of their own financial situation, that they weren't fighting anymore. Mm-hmm. So, there are benefits to that too, even if they're not quite over the edge of deciding to leave. And if I can help them stay together and be happy, then boy, that makes me feel great. So divorce is not a happy thing. I would love to see nobody go through it anymore, so then I can tackle the health insurance problem in the world next.
Well, and the interesting part is, like, when you go through some of these healing groups and post-divorce groups and things like that, did you know what money equals in like healing and such? Trust. So when you have trust issues, that usually will manifest in money. And so if you're in a relationship and the trust issues, you can rectify, you can kind of fix some things and because we use it as control, so it's a lot of dynamics of healing that needs to happen for somebody to kind of move to that position. But I think that, sooner than later, like, do I think you should hire an attorney first? No, I think you should figure out your and you need to do it under the radar. Like, you literally need to work with people that understand that this is highly confidential and that we need to do some of this planning without somebody else knowing, so that you can really say, okay, I feel good about this. Now I have a plan and I take action. And if somebody doesn't understand that in the divorce arena and they call you back up and be like, hey, were you calling about your divorce plan? Blah, blah, blah. Like, your whole plan is busted. We can't undo these things that happen. You can be prepared and what I say is, every hour that you put into this process is an hour that you're not going to pay somebody to do something. But when you find them, then it is worth it to have them really know that piece and do it in an efficient way. So you can't be penny foolish, right? Do the things that you're capable of, do a divorce calculator, do the initial stuff and be like, whoa, that's out of my league. Okay. But then get somebody that helps you walk through it, because your attorneys are not going to know what we're talking about. And that's the reality in divorce right now. And so if you are concerned about the financial, talk to somebody who talks the same language as you, and you can understand them and they understand what your fears are and your concerns. Because that's really where we're coming in, is
That's a great point.
This anxiety about like the future. Well, the more you know, then again, we can't change the reality, but if you understand it, maybe you make different decisions. Maybe you do give up the Starbucks, but you keep the Pilates, or vice versa. Whatever, it's not a judgment call about that. It's getting a reality about what decisions do I need to make to be financially more secure kind of situation. So
Brilliant.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
All right. And hopefully we'll have you on again, because I think we have, maybe when the training comes out, we got to walk them through some calculators, right?
Happy to. Yeah. What a great idea.
I love it. Well, thanks again, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.